Hello, everybody. Welcome to the WrestleWatch Free Agency Podcast, the only podcast in the world of pro wrestling that discusses exclusively free agency and the art of jumping from one promotion to the other. I am Doug.
And I'm Ryan. It really is an art that has to be mastered. You can't just do it, you know?
No, and this is definitely the week to talk about that art because it is a full week of jumps. A lot of people have jumped around, and we're also going to have a discussion later on about, what promotions that we feel are high enough and worthy enough to be considered a jump. And then
Yeah.
we're also going to have a more specific, detailed conversation on what the landscape looks like right now in terms of free agency.
Yeah. How about we actually just start with that? Because there were some people that were not really doing the art of the jump. They were doing they were staying. They're staying put with where they're at. So this week we got reports about Drew McIntyre and Seth Rollins both re-signing with WWE.
Yeah, shortly after last week we had Finn Balor. So the question then becomes, well, here, let's start with this. We had the discussion before is like, how well is WWE going to play defense? Because up to this point, I think it's pretty clear to say they weren't doing very well in free agency. So the people who were genuine free agents out there on the market who had the ability to negotiate back and forth with AEW when there was interest from both sides, in those situations, they weren't necessarily doing very well. And you can kind of understand why, in the sense that AEW, by all accounts, was offering more money for less dates in a lot of these
Yes.
people who are free agents. And that obviously was an issue. So now the question is, did they change their things, or is it a little different now that these are not necessarily people free agents? These are people who are in WWE already and are comfortable in WWE, maybe are happy in WWE, and we're fine just not going into free agency, because I don't think Drew or Seth actually did. They both had time on their contracts left.
Yeah, as far as we are aware, neither of them had their contracts expire. So, also, as far as we are aware of whatever the meaning of contract tampering is
Yes.
in pro wrestling,
Right.
which it's not like necessarily a legally defined thing for pro wrestling, not like a league of collective bargaining like NFL or something like that.
Right. So
It's not. Yeah, it's not like NXT is going to be giving up a draft pick in the next draft versus Ring of Honor or something for a hot prospect.
of course.
Uh,
So these people were still under contract when they made this deal. They were not free agents. So
yeah,
that maybe makes that is a question to me. Would they have gotten a better deal if they've gone into free agency and then tried to negotiate it? Or did WWE suddenly change their tactics and start offering a lot more money to these people after seeing that, they may lose them?
well,
And I'm not sure.
well, what I would point out is that last week in the reports that were about Finn Balor, it specifically said that it was a big money contract. Um, we don't obviously know what the figure is yet, but the fact that that was pointed out, um, it makes me think that WWE, like I said last week, that they're taking this more seriously again about these potential free agents and trying to head off them possibly getting to the open market and having an even bigger contract that they need to counter offer against. So I think that it's probable that the likes of Drew and Seth both resigning, they probably both got enough money that they felt secure about what they got. And again, going back to that whole like they didn't go to the open market, so technically they weren't possibly legally getting contract offers from other promotions. But like, I don't think that that's. I think that they probably have a rough idea of what would have been offered if they went to another promotion. I'm sure that they have a rough, like, you know, brush stroke
They're
of a
probably talk.
range.
They're probably talking. They are talking to someone, even
Yeah,
if it's
exactly.
yeah. I mean, they'll sit there and say, "Oh, contract tampering left and right," but they're all talking. They all know
Hmm.
everyone, but so that's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
So my so I have a feeling that I'm ready to say it. I think free agency season is officially starting to end because with Drew gone, with Seth gone, the only ones really left that I would say at least in WWE, the ones in WWE that I think could jump and make a major difference are Becky Lynch and maybe Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. I'm not
Hmm.
sure I see any others imminently jumping that I think could really pop up in AEW from WWE and make a big difference. I think that's it. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I think that the thing about the types of people that now are on the potential market is that other than those three, there's not really anybody that is for the next 5 years. Let's say like a window of like, let's say, they sign a contract that's a 5 year contract. At the end of those 5 years, do I see this person still being an upper carder if they started as an upper carder? I mean, Sheamus already isn't really an upper carder anymore. He's like an upper mid card, sure, but he's not an upper carder anymore.
yeah,
And then,
and I don't consider him like a major game changer either.
yeah, he's not.
If he
He's
did
not.
jump, yeah,
Yeah. So, I don't think that he would be a major game changer. Could Kevin Owens be a major game changer? I think so. Yes.
yes, I
Um,
agree.
Becky Lynch, obviously, yes.
Yes,
Sami Zayn, debatable, but he had what I thought was the best match of WrestleMania
it,
this year. So,
I think he would
there's
for
that.
AEW's. I think for AEW's audience, he would be. I think
Oh,
he'd be considered a big deal. So I think
definitely.
that would be a jump that would be definitely. I'd put that on that level.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would point out or bring up as a question mark, and this might be reckless speculation territory. I believe that there was like somebody that asked Sean Ross Sapp on his Fightful server maybe a week or two ago by now if there were names of people out there that we weren't aware of that had their contracts coming up. And Sean said that there were some big names in WWE that nobody is talking about, which is fun because he knows and he could talk about it, but he's not, which maybe he just hasn't gotten like hard and fast confirmation from multiple sources that their contract is indeed going to be running out this year. Like remember when like who was it, Adam Cole, his contract just kind of expired and they didn't realize it like ahead of time. They were surprised. They thought it was going to be months away and then it was suddenly ending. I think it was Adam Cole. It might have
Yeah,
been another one of
there's
those.
also Roderick Strong who like just showed up
Yes.
and nobody even knew that his contract was over. They thought he was still in WWE. That was another one.
Yeah, so it's possible that maybe one side knows and the other side doesn't know and all those kinds of things. But anyway, the point is that I think it's intriguing because when I look at the top of the card in WWE, there's only a few names that jump out to me as I haven't heard them resign recently, and I think that they would be a big difference maker jump. I don't think that there's a lot of other people left. I think that the people that just re-signed, your Drew McIntyre, your Seth Rollins, your Finn Balor, those are the types of people that I think AEW is really keeping an eye on and really going to put an offer out on. I'm not sure about other people that are towards the top of the card that they weren't really looking at beforehand. I don't know about people that are lower on the card if they're really, eyeing them up right now. Like we were talking about Cameron Grimes last week. I'm not sure if AEW is eyeing up Cameron Grimes personally. I don't know if this might be the end of the season of this high speed debuts and re-signings and signings and all those kinds of things. This might be the end of it.
Yeah, and I think it's notable that there's not a whole lot of names that are being discussed in AEW for going outside the usual, suspects of like Miro, not Andrade, Andrade's gone. Miro, Malachi Black, Buddy Matthews, and Ricky Starks. It's like those seem to be the big ones that are discussed, and there's
Yeah.
not really any others. And I think it speaks to the fact that AEW, when they had these people, they put them on some really long, sorry,
Well,
some really long deals.
yeah, Malachi and Buddy both have well, I know that Buddy has a deal that's just straight up long at this point, relatively speaking. Malachi's deal, I believe he re-signed and it was like a 7 year deal with two option years and he's coming up on the option years or something of that sort.
Something along those lines. But I feel like it was five. I do, the number like 20, the year 2027 rings in my head for some reason with Malachi Black.
Gotcha.
But but even with that, I'm sitting here thinking like those people, are they would they be game changer moves in the other direction to WWE? Because I think we're all operating under the assumption that MJF has resigned.
Well, I mean, we removed him from the tier list last week, so hopefully he did.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to look silly.
Yeah, so based off of that, I think it's fair to say that he's probably resigned. I don't think
Yeah.
there's any question on that. And then you look at the other people who are heavily pushed right now in AEW on the top of the card. There's
Hmm.
none that I'm really looking at and saying, yeah, they're probably going to jump. Like all the ones that we're looking at are the people who just aren't used well and aren't
Hmm.
given any time, which is not necessarily the same kind of jump that we've been talking about with, with someone like Adam Copeland, for example, who was presented very well all the way up until the end,
Yes.
and then he jumped, or really, or even Bryan Danielson, or any of these other bigger name people in WWE that made the jump to AEW.
Well, yeah.
For AEW, the only ones that have done that, you could argue, are Cody, who made the
Hmm.
jump and then was instantly a megastar, and then you had CM Punk, obviously, which is a weird situation in general. But outside of and maybe you
Jade
can count
Cargill.
Jade, but I don't know that I would necessarily. I mean, she's being presented very well. She's being present. I would argue she's being presented exactly the way she was presented in
The
AEW, where it's just like very little presentation, very little screen time. But by doing that, you're making her seem like a bigger deal.
Well, I mean, they've copy pasted her presentation and everything and where she was on the card from AEW over to WWE. They did the same thing with Cody Rhodes. They just copy pasted everything and just continued his stories.
Yeah,
Like,
and they should have. That was because
yeah,
if it's not broken, don't fix it.
yeah, and it's also telling people that could be looking at WWE from the AEW perspective. This is something that I noticed earlier this week. Um, there's nobody that's been just geeked out of the people that have jumped from AEW to WWE. WWE back, in the WWF days with WCW, they loved signing somebody and then just jobbing them out as a joke because they came from WCW. They loved doing that. Oh, they loved making a joke about their past. So Dusty Rhodes, we're gonna put him in polka dots. That's gonna get him. Oh, we're gonna call him Virgil because it's a joke about Dusty. Ha ha ha. Stuff like that. Eh, They haven't done that this time around with any of the people. Every single person has gotten a legitimate look and a legitimate push. Look at Brian Pillman Jr. now as Lexus King. He's getting legitimate screen time. Sean Spears getting legitimate screen time. Cody Rhodes obviously catapulted all the way to the stratosphere now, finished the story and everything. Jade Cargill is being put in storylines with the top of the card of WWE's women. Everybody is being presented pretty well. Andrade too. He hasn't really changed his position on the card, I don't think that much between the two promotions, but like he
He
didn't
hasn't
drop
dropped.
down. He didn't drop down the card. Yeah.
Yeah, and you could even throw people, back from the pandemic era who maybe were working dark and then were brought into
Mm.
WWE, like Cora Jade.
Yeah, the
Um,
the fact that all of those NXT women that came over that were doing dark or even had worked AEW officially, like Bea Priestley, Blair Davenport, they all got pushed pretty well in NXT and now are working their way up now to being on the main roster card. Most of them. We were talking about one of them that didn't later on in the episode. Um, but that's like I think a really important thing to look at when we're looking at the possibility of people going from AEW to WWE is for the most part, your position on the card is what your position will be in WWE. So if you're saying like, hey, Daniel Garcia, young gun, maybe there's not a lot of space up at the top of the card of AEW for you to push up even higher. Maybe you should come over to WWE. I think that it's possible that WWE tells him, yeah, you're going to be on the main roster. You're going to be competing for Intercontinental and US title. That's where you're going to slot in. Just, we're going to see how it works. And then if it doesn't work, we'll put you down the card. But we're going to try with you if you come over. We're going to actually try to keep you on the same level that you're on right now. Because right now, Danny is like, he's in the scene for TV titles, I think, right now. I think that he's a legitimate person that by the end of the year, you would say, oh, yeah, he should be competing for one of those secondary titles. And if WWE is looking at him, I think by the track record, they would actually give him a decent push and not just throw him down in NXT and say, learn the style, learn the performance center, all those things.
Yeah, and I would argue that it's also a double sword with that too, which is a double-edged sword with that, in the sense that you're sending this message to AEW wrestlers that if you come to WWE, we're going to treat you well. You're going to get a good push, and you're going to be presented in a strong way.
Mm-hmm.
The counter to that, though, and this is where it could be an interesting situation, is you're also sending the message to your locker room that if you want a big push, you got to jump and then
Yeah.
come back.
Yeah.
And I think that I don't think we're going to see that yet. Maybe we'll see that in a year or two, but I think at some point you're going to start seeing a lot of people in WWE who just aren't getting the time, because they are going to get to the point where there's just certain people aren't going to get pushed, and they're going to try to look elsewhere and essentially do exactly what Cody Rhodes did in 2016.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting when you look back at the last wave of people that went from WWE to AEW. And I'm gonna caution it by saying not the people that got cut and went, but the people that chose to go a little bit more. So not as much the sour grape side of the locker room of the AEW
Right.
types. And some of them may have been cut, sure, but like they were wanting to leave also. So look at who the world champions in AEW are right now. You got Swerve and you got Tony Storm. Were they doing back 5 years ago? They were in WWE. And so, but they were pretty, like, they were NXT kind of doing dates in their main roster, but not really being pushed main roster kind of people.
And
Now,
Tony Storm straight up asked for her release.
yeah, yeah. So, like, there are people that wanted to go. And Swerve is somebody that's like, this is the greatest thing that's happened is me being able to leave. I'm not going back. And, there was famously when somebody was trying to contact him from WWE when Triple H came back of, hey, do you want to just break a contract, buddy?
Yep.
And he was like, no, I don't want to. It's a big signal to people that were looking at their time left at WWE, looking at I haven't really been pushed that much. I could get pushed more. They can say, hey, look at the world champions at AEW. Within 4 years, I could be that level. I don't know if maybe I could do that in WWE. Or you look at people that are a little bit older and you look at how they treated Christian, how they treated Adam Copeland, Bryan Danielson as legitimate stars and put them at the top of the card and didn't make it a joke about their age or anything like that. They were like, you guys can still go, shows that you can still go. And Bryan Danielson is now having possibly the greatest year of his entire career right now. Christian Cage probably had his best run as a champion ever in AEW. So I think it says a lot to different talent that both companies are saying, hey, this is what we're pitching.
Yeah, and I think it also perhaps is going to start speaking to the inefficiencies of the performance center, because
Yeah.
when you really get down to it, the biggest criticism AEW, not to say the biggest,
Uh-oh.
but one of the criticisms that I often hear is about how they uh, don't have a performance center, aren't developing talent in the same way that WWE has, this warehouse down in Orlando where they could just churn out talent. But if you really take a look at the last decade of this performance center, it really hasn't had a super strong track record. And
Mm-hmm.
most of the people that end up getting these major pushes are people that get taken from other promotions. So I would argue AEW and WWE are both doing that, where you're seeing them, reach out to New Japan, DDT, other just other promotions in Mexico, and just I don't want to say poaching, but no, they're poaching. They're getting talent from those promotions. You could argue that AEW maybe does it in a less aggressive way, in the sense that they have these working relationships even with the people that they take talent from, and then they allow them to go back and forth, and they still can use those talents. But that's what they're doing. So both AEW and WWE are really not heavily invested on building up their current talent right now. I think WWE would like to, because I think that, as I said before, I think those talent are less likely to be a flight risk.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that we are getting to the point now where they're just trying to sign other people from other promotions to that are already have a proven track record. And you can kind of see that with NXT right now, where the last 2 weeks we were seeing lots and lots of cuts. We saw 10 people get cut yesterday. Last week we saw, I think, 6 people cut. So they're starting to trim the fat as things go.
Well, what I would point out also is that the people that were getting drafted up in this latest WWE draft is that the people that were being drafted up were people with previous wrestling experience. It was not really the people that were coming through the Performance Center as, NIL prospects that they did other sports and WWE went and recruited them. Those are the people that are not getting called up to the main roster. The people that are getting called up are Ilya Dragunov and Mello and stuff like that. Like, those are the people that are going up. The people that were all, former athletes of some sort otherwise are not getting called up to the main roster. And if you look at all the cuts that just happened, it's those people too. It's just the Performance Center, NIL, former athlete milieu of people. It's not like the people that used to work on the indies or did AEW Dark in the past or anything like that. So I think that it's probable that WWE realizes that, yeah, we might want to change our direction of how we're approaching this, but at the same time, they love that pipeline. They love all that stuff. So I don't know if it's going to actually change.
It's weird because I think they love the idea of the pipeline. I think they like the idea that they have this warehouse where they're just, building the stars of the future. But it's just, and in some cases it's working out. I mean, they do have certain people that you could definitely point to and say, yes, that was a 100% Performance Center product, like Bianca Belair or was Tiffany Stratton? I think she was, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, or even Braun Breaker.
And Tiffany Stratton now owns the color pink, for the record, so nobody else can wear that.
Nobody else, yes. So those would be like the few examples that I could think of that have really been like breakout top tier talents that you could point to and say, look at what they did from the ground up. But my counter to that is all the millions and millions of dollars that you've invested in the Performance Center worth it just to get these 3 incredible talents that still are probably not going to necessarily be as big a star as someone who was developed on the outside, like a Gunther or a Cody, Cody's a perfect example. You look at where he was in 2016, and then you saw him jump in 2016 to the Indies and work our Ring of Honor, and he wasn't very good. Like, I remember this very vividly, that he was, the 3-star general, and his matches were just very underwhelming. But then by working all those different styles in these different places, he did get better. Even that late in his career in 2016, he did improve. And by 2018, over 2 years, you could noticeably see that he has figured it out. And now you could argue he's a great wrestler now. I would argue he's a great wrestler now. And he's had some incredible matches. So I think that there's a lot to be said by experiencing a lot of different things. And I just still don't think they're necessarily getting that with this Performance Center. So we'll see what happens in the future, though.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. And we'll also see what happens with free agency. I think that, it might be the wind down season. Maybe next week or in 2 weeks, we'll come back with a Magnificent Seven of AEW, because it looks like your Magnificent Seven of WWE is
it's not very magnificent anymore.
Yeah. It's not so magnificent anymore. So I think that gives us a nice time to take a break here, and then we can come back and talk about those promotions and reevaluating them. And we can also remind folks right now, before we take this break, to please make sure you're subscribed to WrestleWatch on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. We'll be right back with the WrestleWatch podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the WrestleWatch Free Agency Podcast. Once again, we're the only podcast where we talk about pro wrestling free agency exclusively. I'm Doug.
Yep, and I'm Ryan here. So Doug, what do we want to get into next year?
I think we want to talk about. Well, here's what I think we're going to talk about. There was a debate that we were having internally on the committee about what actually makes a promotion someone that would be a jump location. Because obviously, the way we do it with the WrestleWatch tier list is we have a list of promotions that are up for consideration. And what we consider to be a jump is very specific. And actually, Ryan, do you have the definition that we have for a jump on hand?
Yeah, so the thing about all of this is that a jump is someone going from their current promotion or independent status to a new major promotion and either being understood as signed there or they have an exclusive contract. The promotions that we are considering at the current moment, they were AEW, New Japan, Ring of Honor, Stardom, TNA, and WWE. We were saying those promotions because we consider them to be major destinations that have the potential to sign big name talent. And it wasn't about necessarily them actually signing the talent. It was about them having the potential and being considered by talent as a potential landing spot.
You're right. So give an example. So we're saying, how likely is a talent to jump to or between a con promotion being AEW ROH, a TKO promotion being WWE or NXT, or a Bushiroad promotion, New Japan Stardom or TNA. So if someone were to jump from, say, MLW, which would not be a promotion on that list, to WWE, we would consider that a jump. But
So
someone
Jacob Fatu, for example.
correct. But someone going from WWE to, say,
MLW.
MLW or NWA, we would not consider that a jump because that's not a jump. That's not a promotion we consider.
The reasons why we do that are twofold. One, it's to allow us to only be looking at people that are getting exclusive contracts that obviously then puts them off the tier list because then we don't have to talk about them anymore. It's like they've been signed, they're staying where they're at. It is what it is now. If somebody is only on a pay per appearance deal, then it doesn't really allow us to quantify easily what their status is for watching what their movement is going to be. So Sami Callihan, who is still on the tier list, is a good example of that. He is now pay per appearance in two different promotions, and it's getting very confusing about how to discuss him. So that's part of why we don't really look at promotions that don't have a focus on exclusive contracts or don't have a focus on bringing in outside talent. The other reason for doing this is so that we have an agreed upon with the tiers. We agree on what the significance of each tier is. So as somebody goes up the tier list, it says that there is more of a chance of them going to one of these promotions from their current promotion or independent status. So, for example, Matt Hardy is currently at C tier. He did leave AEW, but if he went back to AEW, that would be him going down the tier list because he is returning to a promotion that we already recognize. If he is going to be leaving AEW to go somewhere else that we recognize, like TNA or WWE, which are the possible landing spots for him, he would go up the tier list. And that is why Matt Hardy is a solid C. He's a 50-50 shot.
Now, some of you may be saying, well, he is at TNA, so what are you talking about? Isn't that a jump?
Well, he is vehemently been saying, I am a free agent, and it has been reported that his deal is pay per appearance. So he didn't really jump. He's not exclusively with TNA anymore. I don't know, TNA at the moment.
Yes, and I think that's what we want to kind of emphasize here is that the reason we choose these specific promotions as destinations and ones that we consider for the tier list is these are promotions that are making firm money offers for talent where we're seeing talent jump and where they could actually make a living just doing that one promotion. So we don't consider MLW because we know their contracts, historically have been very finicky and questionable at best. And any other promotion like NWA, which is pretty much nothing but just pay per appearance, we're not going to consider those either. So we do consider TNA, and the reason we consider TNA is because they do have not everyone, but they do have people who are offered exclusive deals, and have the ability to throw some big money around. And in actuality, if we're really being honest, they're owned by a TV station. We don't know what the content bubble is going to look like, but sports rights and are still going up. They haven't popped yet. So there's a very good chance that TNA is going to continue to maybe grow financially over time. So it's not like TNA is in a bad situation.
Well, I think that on that note about the sports rights thing, I think we're starting to hit the ceiling about it, actually.
It hasn't popped yet, though.
It hasn't popped yet, but like when you look at the NBA rights, the last time that they increased, it went up 2.5 times, and this time it's less than twice of a rate hike. And also, we're seeing the fact that allegedly, if Warner Brothers doesn't keep the NBA, they might Comcast part of their pitch is, well, if we take the rights to the NBA, then we don't have to charge them as much for that station, which that is the bubble essentially. It's about to get burst, I think, but that's another conversation.
Yeah.
But the thing that I would be noticing about the types of promotions that we're looking at on the tier list is that there kind of are a few groupings, and it explains the type of talent that we are putting on the tier list. So, first off, we have the grouping of AEW and WWE. They're universally seen as destinations. And I think that generally most people that are listening to this podcast in the wrestling community, if they're speaking in good faith, would see them both as major companies and major destinations. And if a talent was getting released by some place or was leaving one place and was going to get signed straight to the main roster at WWE or at AEW, I think that most people would say that's somebody that's worth looking at and worth putting on the tier list, for example. So, good example, Jade Cargill. Was she a headliner in AEW? No, she was, I would say, upper mid card. She goes to WWE, going to debut in the main roster, easily put her on the tier list, no questions asked.
Yes.
The next kind of basket that we have is Bushiroad, New Japan, and Stardom. They have had in the past a distinction of being an interesting destination for major talent over the years. So we look at Jon Moxley, we look at Chris Jericho, we look at right now Nick Nemeth. People go there, or Matt Riddle even too. People go there because they're interested in going there. Now the yen is down currently, so they're not having as big of an easy time of keeping people or offering up those big contracts. But look at Stardom too. They had Mercedes Monaco over there because she wanted to be there. She was attracted to go there. You look at the kinds of talent that are either the top of the card in AEW or moving up the roster in WWE. A lot of those people did Stardom. So it looks like that Stardom is the kind of place that is attracting those kinds of people. And if the yen was up, might be able to offer the kinds of contracts that keeps them in where they were. So that's that bucket. The third bucket that we have of people that we're looking at on the tier list is NXT, ROH, TNA. The two of those obviously are developmental or sister promotions, if we want to be a little bit greener about it in corporate speak, to their main roster promotion. And then TNA, kind of, when you look at the kinds of talent that we're seeing that are jumping between these promotions and being at the top of the card, similar kinds of talent. And we've had a few times now some people that might not be headline talent that are leaving a current promotion, and they might end up in, say, TNA. And we've had some trouble with getting people on board with thinking that there is enough of a buzz about this talent to put them on the tier list. And I think that that's the distinction then about this group is when we're talking about this group of promotions, we're looking at talent that are probably going to be at the top of the card if they were to go to that promotion. So, for example, of people on the tier list right now, I would say that if Matt Hardy went to TNA, he would be towards the top of the card. If Mustafa Ali stays at TNA with, his X Division reign and all those kinds of things, if he formalizes staying at TNA, he would be towards the top of the card. I think that people that are a little bit lower than that on the card, those are the people where it becomes more, we have more of a debate about whether or not they're going to get added to the tier list. And those are my thoughts on who's there.
Yeah, and I would argue it goes the other way. I mean, for example, in TNA, someone like, say, Joe Hendry, once we get reports that his contract is coming up shortly, which we may have soon, I would imagine he's probably going to get added to the tier list, because even though I think that he's someone I think both promotions are going to fight for. I think that he is someone who has elevated himself. I think he's got a working gimmick. He's probably the most over person at TNA, if we're being completely honest. And I think that he is someone who can make that jump. But I also would not be stunned if he stays in TNA, because I do think TNA has the ability to retain people if they really want. So we'll see. And it's going to be interesting when we go over the tier list as well, which, full disclosure, I did not vote this week. I was very busy on Friday. However, I do think when we go over the changes, I don't actually have a problem with any of them.
Yeah, and what I'll also point out is, as you're kind of saying with your note about TNA, about retaining these kinds of people, it was interesting also when we were having these discussions that we were talking about those other promotions, like there's kind of two other baskets of like international promotions, and so not North American, that or not US really is what I mean by that, because we were talking about Mexican promotions that don't really have a focus on signing outside talent,
Yeah,
and it doesn't mean that.
So someone like CMLL, who actually does sign talent, or even Tokyo Joshi Pro, DDT, who do sign talent technically.
They have exclusive contracts,
Yes.
It's not that we don't think that they're not major companies. Most of the people on our committee love watching those promotions. But the thing is that their focus is not bringing in big name talent for those kinds of contracts. Their focus is on developing talent. So that's why they're not on the tier list for consideration for jumps, because it's not that we wouldn't say, oh wow, if looking at the tier list, let me just throw out a random name that's on there right now. Mustafa Ali. It's not like if Mustafa Ali was like, I'm gonna go to CMLL, we would be like, oh well, CMLL doesn't really count. We would say, well, I mean, that's strange. We haven't seen that before. That would be more the reaction.
Right, but it's also just like, we know that if he were to go there, he's not signing an exclusive deal with CMLL. Because CMLL, now if CMLL signed Mustafa Ali to like a 3-year contract, then I think we would have to sit there and have a real discussion and reevaluate what we think of CMLL as a potential jump location, because now they've done it. They've done something that they haven't done before, and then we have to start considering that. But right now, I would say promotions like DDT, Tokyo Joshi Pro, CMLL, even AAA, these are not promotions where we're seeing them going after free agency, going after talent, and signing them to deals like that. So we just don't consider that. They're working pay per appearance on a lot of these people. So they're not a destination that we would consider in that regard.
Yeah, and I think the two promotions that are starting to bubble up some interest on that regard is MLW, which if they have this cash infusion from their lawsuits and stuff like that, maybe they'll start to look at that. But they haven't gone there yet. They haven't done that yet. That's something that people have thought about and are speculating on in the future. And the other one is Marigold, which we've talked about plenty of times during RossyWatch. No, this is not another episode of RossyWatch. We don't have anything else to say. It's just that we're waiting and seeing with Marigold to see what exactly that promotion will be in the future. So those are the two that I would say are the wait and sees. The other ones, we kind of know what they are, and it would surprise us a little bit if they change the way that they operate their businesses.
Yes. And I think that's the big thing they take away from this is that we're not in a hurry to rush in and add promotions to the list. We'd rather just be patient, see what happens, especially with someone like Marigold, which very well might be one to put on the list. We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like this was my stance on it was that they've already shown that they're a destination and are trying to take people from other promotions that we consider for the tier list. And that to me was a moment of like, hey, wait a second. I think that this might be something here. But I think people are waiting to see how their launch goes and into the future. But I do think that you got to finally watch the Sareee match with Mayor Otani. I hope now you understand where I'm coming from of saying I think that she's somebody that if we're looking at this as a competition between Stardom and Marigold is somebody to it's going to be fun to watch what happens with her if she doesn't stay freelance.
Right. And obviously with Mayu Iwatani, we're all keeping an eye on her too because
that exactly too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that actually kind of gives us a nice jumping off point after a quick break to go through the tier list and see who's on there still, what's going on with all of them. Does that sound right to you, Doug?
Sounds like a plan.
Awesome. We'll be right back with the WrestleWatch podcast. All right, everybody. Welcome back to the WrestleWatch podcast, the only podcast where we talk about free agency in the world of professional wrestling. I'm Ryan, and I have the tier list, which might be a surprise to Doug. He did not vote this week. So we'll find out if he agrees with these changes to the tier list or not. How about that, Doug? I'll read the names and you'll find out.
Okay, that sounds like so. We're gonna start by just going through who's in S first.
Yeah, we're gonna start with S tier here, and we have Kamille, Jacob Fatu, Motor City Machine Guns. They were the people from last week in S tier. Somebody that's new in S tier, Doug. You might not know about this one. Erick Rowan. Did you hear about that? With what's going on with him?
I did hear about him. He is apparently signed to WWE I'm guessing to work with was it Uncle Howdy?
Yeah, there were some rumors about if this is going to be a kind of Wyatt tribute stable with him, Erick Rowan. There was talk about Joe Gacy possibly being in the stable too, or I think. But yeah, that's what the rumor is of what he's going to be doing when he works there. But it has been reported that he is going and signing with WWE. Doug, would you have voted for S tier?
I would have. Yes, I would have absolutely voted for S tier. This is, I mean, once you get the reports that someone has signed, in my mind, that's you're absolutely in S tier.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And speaking of which, just as a little quick update on somebody that's here as well, Kamille, it has been officially reported now by a number of outlets that she is officially signed to AEW. So I suppose we're going to now be waiting and seeing on when she'll be debuting with AEW.
Yeah, and I believe they said she's been signed since February.
Something around there, yeah. And there are some people that were tea leaf reading of maybe she hasn't debuted yet because AEW didn't know about what Stardom's relationship was going to be at that time, things like that. But I think that it's just that the story. I think that they know what they want to do with her in the storylines. I think that that's what's going on.
I don't understand what Stardom would have to do with it. I mean,
I don't know either.
Yeah.
But okay. So that's the latest. Jacob Fatu, at the time of this recording, Backlash in France has not happened yet. It's possible that he's going to be debuting there. Some people were saying he might not be able to get into France, but that is the update on him. Is allegedly he is going to be debuting imminently in WWE. Motor City Machine Guns don't know much else about them. Nothing real updates with them.
But they're supposedly going to be in AEW.
Yes, yeah. And speaking of which, looking at A tier, that was the worst transition I've done on this podcast. Do you think that there's anybody in A tier, Doug?
There's not.
No, there's nobody in A tier anymore. It's an empty tier.
And this once again speaks to what I'm talking about when I say that I feel like free agency season is ending because the only people we have the people who we know for a fact have signed reportedly, and then the people that we think are imminently about to sign somewhere, we don't have any.
Yeah, no, yeah. And this, of course, A tier, we're saying, just to quantify it a little bit, we're saying that's above a 75% confidence rating of they're going to sign to a new promotion. So everybody else on this tier list, we're not as confident about signing somewhere, which is a big change of how things have been. But at the same time, a lot of the people that are up in S tier, they were in A tier for a little bit. So I think that we're looking at our track record, seeing how good we are about it in the future.
Yeah, and it looks
Um,
like we're doing pretty good.
yeah, doing pretty good on that. So down into B tier now, there I don't believe there have been any real changes except for somebody did drop out of B tier. We'll get to them in a little bit. But the people in B tier, if we were reading them off, it's Grizzled Young Veterans, Shelton Benjamin, Mustafa Ali, Katsuhiko Nakajima, and Ricky Starks. Was there any real updates with any of them in the past week, other
Uh,
than Grizzled Young Veterans appeared on Collision, but no real updates on them. Anything otherwise?
uh, Grizzled Young Veterans, yeah, they were on Collision, but it was just a allegedly just a one-off, at least for now. I think there was reports of Shelton Benjamin. There was some talks of him
Oh,
potential.
there was the report that he was allegedly going to be brought into AEW to work a program with someone, and then that person was not available to work the program anymore, and then they just didn't bring Sheldon Benjamin in.
Yeah, okay.
So to me personally, I think that that brings down my confidence in Sheldon Benjamin going to AEW. I don't know if it brings him down on the tier list just because of the TNA factor of it all. Um, but that's my current feeling on Sheldon Benjamin is that I think that it's a little bit less likely of him jumping because if they were just looking at him for a single program and if that one program just wasn't able to be worked out because of an injury or something like that,
To me,
it
that
it, it
sorry,
speaks to me that yeah, like if they didn't bring him in, then they didn't have any other plans for him, you know?
to me that sounds like he wanted to because we already heard like reports that Mox is the one who wanted to bring him in.
Uh-huh.
And if that person is not available anymore, and it sounds like Mox is probably not going to be around AEW for the next couple months, just since he's going to be in Japan so much, I wouldn't be stunned if that was maybe the direction.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thought. And then or Daniel, I don't know. Is Danielson injured, or is this just storyline? Do we even know?
We never know with Danielson.
We never
As
know with Danielson. Yeah, he's going to be selling it regardless.
he's
So
gonna sell, he's a famous liar, and he learned it all from Cody Rhodes.
yes, absolutely.
um,
So then, yeah, the rest on the list, I don't think there's anything we really need to talk about. We need to talk about Mustafa Ali, Ricky Starks, nothing changed. Nakajima's nothing changed. So they're all, I have nothing to add.
yeah, so somebody that's not here, we'll talk about it in a second, but it's not going to be in C tier, Doug. For Thekla, it's not going to be in C tier. C tier at the current moment is Kevin Owens, Leo Rush, Matt Hardy, Sheamus, and Cameron Grimes. Again, not much changed. I suppose the thing to note with Kevin Owens, of course, is all of his other buddies on the Magnificent Seven are slowly signing, and he is still uh, we know his contract is up at the end of the year, so maybe that's why that there hasn't been a lot of news about him.
Yeah. Well, there was one change in C because Seth Rollins was in C and now he's
Oh
gone.
yeah, well there's that.
Yeah. So we already kind of talked about Seth Rollins. So Seth Rollins is gone. He was one though that I genuinely thought could have benefited from going elsewhere, but if he got the money deal that he wanted and he's getting the contract and the schedule that he wants, I can understand him just saying, "Hey, I'm comfortable where I'm at."
Yeah.
I get it. So, you know, he as long as he got the bag, that's all I care.
Hmm. So unless you have anything else to say about any of the other C tier people, we can go to D.
Yeah, I have nothing else to add. I think they're all good.
So down in D, we have Malachi Black, Buddy Matthews, Matt Cardona, Dustin Rhodes, Kaito Kiyomiya, Hikaleo, Jeff Hardy, Jinder Mahal, and now here's where Tekla comes in. Doug, do you think that you agree on Tekla going down from a B to a D?
Yes, I do. I think that at this point she has returned to stardom and has been inserted into a big angle. Um, I didn't know until I watched the show that she had joined Oedo Tai. I heard she came back, and then
Yeah, yeah,
and then I and then apparently and then allegedly kicked out Starlight Kid, or
yeah.
Starlight
So
Kid's gone.
yeah, it's interesting because they added her to the roster page for XX's Venus, I think it was before the show. And so people thought that she was joining Venus, and then she comes in and she's like, "Nah, screw that."
Yeah, so who I don't even. It's hard to tell exactly what's going on with Starlight Kid, but that's another
But yeah,
discussion.
that was the thing, was like it seemed like that she's kind of has an offer to join Stars, but some of the people in Stars are like, "No, no, you're evil. We can't let
Yeah,
you back in."
yeah, you left already. You already were here once. All right.
um,
But
but
yeah,
yeah,
I think
that's all storyline. Yeah.
yeah. So, but based off of that, like clearly, like Tekla's there. She's not going
Mhm.
like she's in a storyline, so she's not. I don't think she's going anywhere imminently. I do think that I see her perhaps doing the Forbidden Door.
Yeah.
I think this because let's be honest here, she is someone who just oozes charisma and would be a massive star on American television. She's just designed for for American TV,
Yeah.
and I think that at the very least, doing some type of Forbidden Door angle would be a great way to do it.
Yeah, and I still think that it's still in the ether about her feelings about all the idol culture kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I agree with that. I think that she would do fantastically on American TV if she ever wants to do that. So maybe we'll see her test it out with Forbidden Door season.
Yeah.
Um, Everybody else in D tier, I don't really have much to talk about with the rest of them. Do you, Doug?
No, none of them really changed, so I think we're good there.
Well, one person did change, and but they're not in D tier anymore. They're in F tier now. That's Becky Lynch. Uh, I guess the news with her is everybody looks like they're staying, including her husband.
Yeah. I think that I think Seth Rollins had a bigger reason to leave than Becky did in terms
Mhm.
of presentation. I think that they're gonna pay Becky what she wants. I don't. I mean, I'll be maybe they won't, but I would be very surprised if they don't.
Yeah,
So I'm sure she's going to, you know, make her demands. She says she knows what she's worth, so and she should make those demands. But I would be surprised if they don't give her what she wants. So I think that moving her down to F tier, especially after Seth signed, I think makes a lot of sense.
I would say that I would not be surprised if she resigns. Part one. Part two with that, I would not be surprised if when she does resign, it gets announced that she has the biggest contract for a woman in WWE history.
I I believe that she's going to demand whatever Mercedes got, she's going to want more than that.
Yeah,
And
I think that
yeah,
I think at the very least she's going to get it more than what Charlotte got.
yes, I agree.
Yeah,
I think that I'll say that if she genuinely accepts less than what Mercedes got, I assume that she somehow she'll know what she got.
probably.
And
Yeah,
I would be stunned if she accepts less. I really would. I just don't see after everything she said and the way she was negotiating with that interview, because that's all, posturing to try to get the better deal. It's like it
yeah.
doesn't seem like she's someone who's gonna. I feel like I said before, I think she'll take that as a personal insult. It's like, oh, you don't. This is how you value me, and I would. That's how I would approach it. I don't know, and so
Well,
we'll see.
I would say that there might be now extenuating factors that might keep her staying at WWE. Now that we know Seth is going to be staying, I think that it gives a little bit more of a reason for her just to just stay if it's in the same region as the Mercedes contract. If it's in the same region, it says, okay, well, um, I could jump or and get more money, but I don't mind this number.
Yeah, it's that's true too. We'll see. We will
Um,
see.
So the other person that dropped from D to F tier, we're just gonna hit this one quick, is Sami Callihan. We've mentioned him a few times on the podcast, I think, so far. I just think that it's just a situation that I cannot quantify Sami Callihan anymore personally. So personally, I voted just to remove him from the tier list because I don't understand what's going on with him anymore at this point.
I don't think anyone, I think at this point it's pretty clear what happened. He tested free agency.
Mhm.
He tried to, he had people that were kind of pushing for him to get into AEW. I don't think anyone bit. I don't think anyone bit in WWE, so he's back in TNA now.
Yeah.
I don't know that he's signed. Once again, TNA, you can never tell with them, but my hunch is that he's not under contract unless I hear otherwise.
Mhm.
So and even if he does, it's not really a jump because he was in TNA, he left TNA, and then he went back to TNA. So it's just like, that's not a jump.
Yeah. So that's why he went down the tier list. I think it's the combination of those two factors of, well, if he goes to TNA, it's not really a jump because he's just going back to where he was. And the other factor of, I think people are just like, it's been a very long time now, relatively speaking, to when he left TNA originally, and
Yes.
nothing happened. Essentially nothing changed. Um, the rest of I'm gonna read off the rest of the F tier, and then we have two people that got added this week to F tier, who we can talk about, and maybe we can hear your opinion on whether you would have added them or not.
And then we have one. Did we get one that came off F tier?
Let me review. You probably have it right in front of you.
Let me. Yes, Daniel Garcia is off F tier.
Yeah. Daniel Garcia. Let's hit on him first, then, since his name got brought up. He Beetlejuiced his way into the conversation there.
Yes.
Um, I personally don't agree with removing him yet because his contract is still up this year, and we haven't gotten any news on him re-signing yet. So that was the reason why he got added to the tier list. I was kind of apprehensive about adding him to the tier list to begin with, but once he got added to the tier list, and that was the reason, my brain went into and kicked into gear and said, well, if that's the reason, then you should stay on the tier list. Um, there have been intimations that he would like to stay in AEW, but there hasn't been anything of him saying outright, I'm going to resign. I just haven't yet. Or there hasn't been anything of he has resigned yet. So that's my personal opinion. Doug, how do you feel about taking Daniel Garcia off the tier
I
list?
I don't mind either way. I think he could be off, and he can because here's the thing, he can go back on. Like we'll probably hear something else from him in the future, and then he'll get thrown back on. Um,
Oh yeah.
I
Oh yeah. My bet is that within the next 2 weeks we're going to hear something and we're going to put him right back on.
Yeah, and that's fine. But right now, if people feel like that nothing is going to happen imminently with him, and he's not worth having on the list, I don't have a problem with that. But I do think he's going to be back on before he signs. I would say that.
Yeah. The remaining people that are still on F tier before we hit the two people that got added, just to quickly go through them, is Sareee, who we talked about a little bit earlier on the podcast. Otami Hayashishida, who will be going to going to Marigold during this month. They're having their premiere show, but there's still rumors of possibly going to WWE from there. Hook, who might be testing free agency this year. El Phantasmo, who I think was actually on commentary for a little bit on New Japan Dentaku, so might be a sign of him staying around there. Natalia and Nikki Bella, no real new news with those two. Did you have any points you wanted to make with any of those before we get to the two people that got added, Doug?
Just with Nikki Bella, I think that it's very clear that the way I said it yes last week, but the way she put those comments out, that was more or less her like signaling that, hey, I'd be willing to talk if you want to talk, but
Yeah.
I don't think anything's going to come of that. And Natalia, I've always felt that there's never been any indication she's going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
I don't buy it. And then, so that I don't have anything to add with them.
Okay, so the two people that got added to the tier list this week were Ethan Page and Gigi Dolin. Doug, let's talk about Ethan Page first. Would you have added him to the tier list, and how high would you have voted?
I would have added him, and I would have added him to F.
Mm-hmm.
And here's my thought process with him. So He is a talented guy,
Hmm.
obviously. Um, he left. He's out of AEW now. He came in, in that was it ring? Was it 2021 Revolution 2021? That
I
sounds right.
believe so. That sounds about right. It was in that era of all the people that were jumping from WWE over
Yes.
to AEW. He
So yeah,
joined in that
that was
era.
in the pandemic. That was a pandemic.
Yeah,
What?
he debuted as the mystery entrant in the Face of the Revolution ladder match at the 2021 Revolution pay-per-view.
Okay. So that's about. So he was there for 3 years. So if he had a 3-year contract and he hasn't been on TV since,
December, I think.
yeah, so it would make sense that maybe he had a 3-year deal and they just let it run out. Um, so with that, I'm not surprised because they tried with him. Like I don't know, he hasn't necessarily said anything, sour grapes or in along those lines, but they did try with him. They put him in a tag team. They gave him a couple singles opportunities, and he just didn't catch fire.
Yeah.
And that just happens sometimes. And I get it. And I like Ethan Page. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, I'm trying to think like what was his big moments in AEW? Like maybe that match with Darby. Was it the coffin match?
Yeah,
Um,
he had that. He was involved with the Men of the Year American Top Team thing,
yeah. So
which kind of became a Jericho vortex at a point also.
it's not his thing. It's not his fault.
No.
Like, it's just sometimes it doesn't work out. So and then he'll try someplace else. But the reason we have him at F tier is that he's also a guy who's burned so many bridges. I mean, I don't. He was at TNA, he burned that bridge. He was at Evolve, he burned that bridge. Previous Ring of Honor, he was at there and he burned that bridge. He just didn't get along with a lot of people, to be completely honest. I don't know what the deal is. And maybe TNA is different now and different people involved, but I believe he was a Scott D'Amore guy.
Yeah, he
So
kind of was. Yeah. So it's interesting because that got brought up of, well, it seems like he might have burned some bridges at TNA when he left there. But at this, it's a different regime a little bit from that time. But at the same time, like, yeah, he was more of a Scott guy. So,
and
eh,
so it's like I'm looking at like his options. Could he go to New Japan? I don't know. He doesn't feel like a New Japan guy. Could he go
no.
to WWE? Or like maybe I don't know, run in
Mm.
NXT, but he's also kind of it's not like he's super young either. That's the other thing. So
He's
like
34.
yeah, but in terms of like, going to NXT, I mean, I guess that's not super uncommon anymore. And that's the other thing. He's got some good size. I think he's all over 6 foot. He has a good look, and he's a decent hand. So
Yeah.
he's a good guy to have around. I think with AEW, it's just the problem is they just have so many good hands and good people to have around that, sometimes some gotta fall through the cracks. So he'd be good. He'd be good someplace else. I know he's probably gonna go ahead and go back on the indies and grind because that's what he's done, and he's done really well with that. So we're gonna see him around. I just
Yeah.
don't know that I necessarily see him jumping anywhere that would be uh, a reason to put him higher up on the tier list than F tier.
Yeah, that's my feeling on it too, is that I felt like I didn't really know if it is a we don't put him on the tier list or if he's an F kind of, but it's in that kind of area because he. The other thing to note with all of this is that word from AEW and from Page and people that are familiar with this, they just said that his departure was a formality, as in the contract just ran out.
Yeah,
Um, and he already had been taking indie bookings and ramping up his indie bookings, and uh, so he knew that he wasn't coming back to AEW before now.
yeah.
Um, so it doesn't sound like there. Sure, maybe he could go back there, but it doesn't sound like there's any bad blood. Even if I'm not sure if they will bring him back necessarily, but there's not bad blood there. It sounds like.
No, I don't think so either.
Um, So yeah, I agree with the assessment that you were giving, that it doesn't, I don't know where he's gonna go from here. So I suppose F tier then is an appropriate place for him. Um the next person here is Gigi Dolin. Are you familiar with her, Doug?
I am familiar with Gigi Dolin.
Okay, good. Because she got added to the tier list. Would you have added her?
I would have. And here's the thing with Gigi Dolin. I've seen her. I've watched a lot of her career early on because I was watching Evolve when it was around, so I remember her time in Evolve. I've seen her on the Indies as Priscilla Kelly. Um, I've seen her work live a lot, and she is honestly someone who's a really good worker.
Hmm.
I mean, people really underestimate how good she is because she's very talented. If you you go look up some of the stuff that she did right before she signed with WWE. She was doing really well, and she's had some decent stuff in NXT as well. But obviously in WWE, she was paired up with the Toxic Attraction group, which obviously after NXT 2.0 went away, that whole presentation was really questioned.
Hmm.
Um, it was, and then and she just kind of floundered for a bit and wasn't really pushed and really wasn't presented as well. And then recently we had the draft and she was not brought up. So a lot
Yeah.
of people were saying like, well, okay, well, what's the direction with her at this point? And I think that some people think that that means that she might get cut soon. I don't know
Hmm.
if that's necessarily the case, but we'll see. And if she does, I think we'll be she'll be moved off F tier for sure. Because I do think if she is released, she will be shot. She'll shoot up that tier list because she's gonna find a landing spot, and I think it could be an AEW. She did work she worked on a Dynamite actually once against
Yeah.
Britt Baker,
Yeah. She
and
was, yeah, she was also on All Out's card.
yes, she was there as well on one of the Battle Royals. So she's worked AEW before. She's someone who I think could do well in TNA. For those reasons alone, I would probably move her up if she gets released. But until that happens, and if that happens, so I'm not even necessarily saying it's gonna happen. I think keeping her at F tier is good.
Yeah, so that's pretty much my feeling too. It was kind of like a dead man switch on getting her on the tier list here because people were noticing that the draft was coming up, and uh, originally there were reports of NXT's involved in the draft, and people thought, oh, it means that they're going to draft people. No, it just meant that people from NXT were going to get drafted. And she was not one of those people that got drafted. She's still down in NXT. I'm not sure really what's going on with her. She signed to WWE back in January 2021. So in theory, if she had a 3-year contract with them, in theory, it's up now or about to be up. Um, I agree that I think that if she were to actually be going to free agency coming up here, which I think that just based on that timeline that she might be at some point soon, I think that she would get a lot of interest from other promotions that we look at, AEW or TNA for that matter too. So I totally agree with putting her on the tier list, even though this is one of those ones where we don't have a lot of contract news and certainty of why we're putting her on the tier list. But I think that we have some people on the tier list anyway that are that kind of person. Like Buddy Matthews is up in D tier. Matt Cardona is in D tier. People that we don't have like a lot of certain news
Yeah,
about them, but there is some vibes about what's
yeah,
going on with her.
yeah. I was gonna say some vibes, and that's fine to have, especially lower on the tier list. I think vibes are fine. Vibes
Yeah,
are enough to get someone on an F tier.
I agree with that. Yeah. So Doug, did you have any more thoughts about anybody on the tier list? I think that we've covered everybody because we've even covered the people that dropped off this week, which were Daniel Garcia, Drew McIntyre, and Seth Rollins. Did you have any thoughts about anybody else?
No, I don't think so. I will just say this real quick, and that's
Mm,
that as we go through these, I think the one thing that I want to kind of emphasize is that I think we're going to be keeping an eye on how accurate we are. And then
mhm.
if there are times where we are accurate, which, often we are, we'll discuss that. And if we're not accurate on something, we're going to have a discussion on why that happened. And
Yeah,
I think that's going to be an important part of this as well, is just understanding like what was missed and what is different, because these are things that we're going to then apply going forward.
Well, how about we quickly touch on that, because I think that we've already discussed that on Seth Rollins. He was at a C tier. It seemed like it was a 50-50 toss-up. He did end up re-signing. So accuracy, 50% accurate, I suppose, is how that will get looked at.
Yeah, and I think that I had to look, but I feel like I was one who was always kind of saying I think we're a little high on Seth Rollins.
You thought that he should have been in D tier last week, even.
Yes. And I do, and I think that maybe the issue with Seth Rollins is a lot of the times when we're talking about him, it does make a lot of sense for him to go, because the jokes are that he just is treated like a geek in this company, and I understand that. I understand that perspective, that he's presented that way, but at the same time, he's also presented well within the framework of WWE as well. And he's also an upper mid-carder in the largest company in the world. So it's like, maybe he doesn't want to move from that. And I understand that. And he's comfortable there. So those are the things that I kept running through my head, where it's like, that would be a big jump for him to leave. And I just didn't know that he was going to necessarily do that. I understood the argument. That's why I had him at D tier at least, but I just didn't, I thought that C was a little high.
And then Drew McIntyre was in D tier, which meant that we were thinking that there was more likely than not that he was going to stay. Of course, I think that there was the buzz about him leaving for so long because it seemed like he was going to leave almost definitely back, leading up to the Royal Rumble, where his contract seemed to have expired, or it was going to expire. So I think that if we had him in the side of the tier list DRF, that it was a low likelihood, that's mostly a hit then, right, Doug?
I agree.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, we'll be keeping an eye on this as time goes on to see how accurate we've been, and we'll probably do a roundup around maybe midway through the year here in a month or two, just looking back at the first half of the year and seeing where we've been right, where we've been maybe a little bit too reading too many tea leaves that just turned out to be coffee grounds. And we'll see where things go from there. I think that might be the end of it for this week of the podcast, though. Doug, does that sound right to you?
I think that's it. So the only thing I'm going to end with is I just ask that everyone please subscribe to the WrestleWatch podcast, give us a rating on Apple Podcast or whatever podcast catcher you use, and we will see you next week.
Yeah, so for WrestleWatch, I'm Ryan.
And I'm Doug.
All right, see you next week, everybody. Take care.